Hello and welcome to Escape Studio's free tutorials. My name is Mark Spevick and I'm going to take you through a free tutorial to show you how to make an Indiana Jones style rope bridge. We're going to be looking at Maya 2013, because we've got some very interesting new features in 2013 that will allow this type of effect to occur now. Couldn't previously do this in earlier versions of Maya. The feature we're going to be looking at today is N-hair. Now the N system in Maya is the nucleus system of dynamics that first started off with N cloth, and then in later releases we had N particles, and now with this release in Maya 13 we've got N hair. Now what does that mean exactly? Well, in Maya we have various dynamic systems for hair, for rigid bodies, and so on and so forth, but the problem is they all have a different solver, so therefore they don't really talk to each other properly. You can get hair to affect a rigid body, or rigid body to affect hair, but what you can't get is a two-way relationship between the two. This was the idea behind the nucleus solver, the fact that you have one solver, and therefore all the different types of simulation you have within that solver should have this dual relationship between them. So within the nucleus solver we now have particles, cloth and hair, and you can have the state now where the cloth will pull on the hair and the hair will pull back on the cloth in the same frame. Not previously possible. So this N-hair is very, very exciting. Now, I'm not going to go through the settings of N-hair and how it all works. I'm going to assume that people have used Maya's old hair system, and N-hair is pretty much exactly the same, except things like the collisions and the constraints are handled by the nucleus engine, plus you get all the bonus that it properly interacts with anything that's simulated with the nucleus solver. So, like I said, I'm going to build a nice big rope bridge and then probably drop a ball on it and show you some of the other cool features that the N system can do. So let's have a look at Maya 13 now, and let's try and draw this in a very simple way. Now I'm just going to change to my side view on the camera, and what I'd like to do is measure out quite a large rope bridge. Now I want to count these divisions between the grid markers here, the grid lines, but I want to count sort of 10 or 20, and it's going to be quite painful to go 1, 2, 3, 4. So what I can do is actually change the layout of the grid here so I can count a lot quicker. We can do that in the settings up here in display. Got grid. If we bring up the option box, we've got our various, there we go, settings here. Now what's interesting, let me just reset that to the default settings so we're all on the same place. What's interesting here is we can see that the grid is 12 units in perspective view, and we got a grid line every 5 units. So that's 5, 10, etc., etc. And then we have this thing called divisions. Now at the moment we can't see any divisions on our grid, they're all grey. That's because in the colour section here we can see that they're all grey. Now I'm going to change my grid division lines here into a red colour. Let's find a nice bright colour that's easy to see. There we go, let's try red. And if I hit apply, that's not the one that I wanted. Let's bring this back to grey. It's not the subdivision lines I want, it's the grid lines, which are every 5 units. So let's change this to red. There we go, hit apply. So the subdivisions here should be every 1 unit, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the grid lines are every 5 units. So if I just close this, I can easily count very quickly. So 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, and so on and so forth. It just makes the grid easier to count larger numbers with and try to keep your eyes from getting confused with all these grid lines. Cool. So now I've set that up, I can very easily make some long curves, so that's what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to place my curves in a straight line, and the easiest way to draw a straight line is to use the Edit Point Curve tool or the EP Curve tool. That way I'm just going to click the front and end of the curve and it will draw the rest in between. So let's go create EP Curve tool. I'm just going to bring up the options, just reset those. It's on the default settings, and let's zoom out a bit. In fact, I could use a CV or an EP curve at this point because I'm only going to draw the start and end points, and they're the same on both types of curve. So let's start at the origin, and I'm going to count 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 units out, and I'm going to hold down X to grid snap that point there so it's exactly placed at that intersection. And then I want to come this side and do another one at 30 units to the other side of the 0 point. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And holding down X to grid snap another point there as well. So now we should have a curve that's 30 units in length. Brilliant. So what I'm going to do, this will be the base part of my rope bridge. Now all rope bridges, Indiana Jones style or not, have two have a rail. This will be the bottom bit where the wooden planks are on, and we need a rail for it. So I'm just going to do Control D to duplicate it. Zoom in a bit and use grid snapping this time. Hold X and just drag it up. Let's go 4 units up in Y. So look in perspective. There's kind of the length and proportion of my rope bridge. Good. Back to side view. Now, what I'm going to need to do here is I'm going to put in some uprights, bits of rope going across, and I want them uniformly spaced. Now, the thing about end cloth and end hair is we're going to end up pinning all these curves, the dynamic curves together, all these hair curves together, using their CV. So what I must do is place my down curves exactly where a CV is on this top curve, and at the moment I don't have many CVs. So what I need to do first of all is put some CVs as a template. The reason is when I add the constraint later, it'll actually connect CV to CV, so I must make sure that they are in the same place, otherwise my constraints to hold this together won't quite work properly. So you have to build it properly from the very, very beginning. Now, in order to place the number of CVs that I want along this curve, is very simple. I can do what's called rebuilding the curve. Now, if we change the menu here to surfaces, we've got the edit curves menu. If I just drop down here, we have rebuild curve. I'm just going to bring up the options on that and just reset them back to the default. And you can see the default here is to rebuild the curve uniformly, and it's going to rebuild it with this number of spans. Now I've got 30 units. I've drawn this curve over 30 units, so to make life easier for me, I'm going to have 30 spans. If I hit apply now, I had both curves selected, so it'll rebuild both at the same time. But after hitting apply, if I go display NURBS CVs, this will just turn on the CVs even though I'm in object mode. And there I can see I have a CV at every other point along the grid there, which is brilliant because that's where I want to draw now my down curve. So I'm going to zoom into one end here, and again I'm going to bring up the EP curve tool, and I'm going to turn on, where is it, up here, point snapping, so I can click one point here and one point there, hit enter. And let me turn off the point snapping. I use point snapping because then this curve snaps to those CVs, and that'll help these constraints work later on. And that's in exactly the right place. Now I'm going to hit W for the move tool, and I can see my pivot is at the center of the world. That's not where I want it to be. I want it to be in the center of my new curve here. So I'm going to go modify center pivot, which pops the pivot in the right place. Now I could make these manually, or I could do Control D and drag one and then drag another and so on and so forth. But that's a little laborious, so let me show you a quick way to do that. Now, in order to automate this, I need to know how many units to the right I want to move my curve. So let me approximately drag it over, and I can see that that's 2 units. Let me undo that. And if I did that 2 units, I'm going to want, how many CVs have I got here? I'm going to want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, about 30. I can always delete if there's too many. So I need 30 at 2 units apart. That will allow me to go into Edit and use this Duplicate Special menu. Duplicate Special is very good. Let me reset the settings. This is basically duplicating on steroids. It's going to allow me to make multiple copies at an offset. So I know, looking down at the axis here, that positive Z is to my left. In fact, I want to move them in negative Z by 2 units. So I want to translate by -2 in Z. And I want to make, say, 29 copies. So what this means is every time it makes a copy, it's going to move it by -2. So I should get them laid out in the line that I want here, saving me moving them all. So let's hit apply. And let's see if I made too many. Oh, yeah, look, 1 too many. Don't want that one. Delete him. There we go. Duplicate Special made mincemeat of pulling out all these curves. And look, because we measured them and we've built everything nicely around the origin, they're all lined up to those CVs just as I wanted. Good. Now, the only other thing is if I hit F8, we can see we don't have many CVs along down those curves and many CVs along this point. Now, the thing about any deformation you do in Maya, polygons, NURBS, or whatever, is that the objects can only deform around the points, around the CVs. So my curve, if I just zoom in a bit, will bend at this point and this point, but it won't bend between these uprights. I need it to bend between those uprights, so I need to increase the resolution of both these curves in order that they can bend between the upright curves. Let's hit F8 again. So I'm going to have to rebuild them again. which is fine. I only rebuilt them at this low res so I could have the CVs to snap to. Now I'm going to rebuild it at a higher res in order that it will sim nicely and give me nice curvature. So back to Edit Curves, Rebuild Curve. And this time, in order that I can keep my CVs where the down curves are, I need to use multiples of 30 here, and that should keep things nicely spaced. So I want 3 times as many, in other words 3 divisions between here, or even 4. Let's go for 4. So 4 times 30 is 120. If I hit apply, there we go, get 1, 2, 3, 4 spans in between our uprights. And that means this curve can bend here, here, here. So that should be enough of a resolution. Now I need to again rebuild these guys, these upright guys, for the same reason. They're not going to bend nicely because I've only got 3 spans. So again, rebuild curve. And instead of 3 spans, I'm going to go for something like 9. That should be enough for this. There we go, 9 spans. And you can see there's a lot more res there. They're going to bend a lot more effectively. Brilliant. Just going to save, call me superstitious, but Maya does have a tendency, in fact all software has a tendency to crash. You should always save your scenes. So let's just call this Rope Bridge version 1. I can't spell rope, but never mind. That's why I'm an artist and not a writer. So here we are, we're ready to go. Now I'm just going to select all of these curves because that's only 1/2 of the rope bridge. And I'm going to hit W to modify center pivot, which will probably keep it where it is because it's centering from all the others. And I'm going to turn on grid snapping this time up here, this button. This will allow this to snap across the grid in Y. I'm going to snap it into 2 units this side of the 0. I'm then going to do Control D, which will duplicate everything here, and then drag the copy 2 units the other side of the 0 point there, 0 in X. And there's my sides of my rope bridge so far. So far, so good. Brilliant. Let me save again. Now what I need to do before I start building this system is actually put in the wooden slats for the rope bridge itself. And they'll do 2 things. They'll have the bit for someone to walk on, but also they'll provide the strength across the bottom of the bridge here, joining these 2 sides. So what I'm actually going to do, since this system does react with end cloth as well, I'm going to make end cloth objects. Now end cloth objects are flexible because they have a lot of edges along them. And if you were to build an object with no edges, it's not going to be allowed to flex. In other words, it'll be rigid. So this is a good trick of using rigid bodies or making end cloth do rigid bodies and therefore look like there's rigid bodies reacting with the system. They're not really, they're actually end cloth objects and slightly flexible, but we can pretty much get away with it. So let's look at how we can achieve that. It's very simple. Just going to create a polygon cube, and this will be my step. Let's hit F, which will frame me on the cube. And first of all, I'm going to hit W. Let me turn off the snapping. I can tell it's on because the center of the gnome on here is a circle. It should be a square. There we go. It's no longer snapping. And I want to move my pivot point from the center to the top edge here. This will help me place the actual step much more accurately. So I'm going to hit Insert to move the pivot. I'm going to select the pivot's green axis or the y-axis so it goes yellow, which means it can only move in that axis only. And then I'm going to hold down V for vertex snapping and middle click on one of the vertices at the top of the cube. That will make the pivot now snap to the top of the cube. So let's hit Insert. And I can now drag this and hold V again for vertex snapping and snap it to a vertex on the bottom of my bridge there. Almost in the right place. I'm just going to hit R to scale it to make it thin enough. And a little bit thinner. I'll leave it at that size for the moment, actually, in the Z. Now I'm just going to hit W and translate this all the way to the end of my bridge. So the first one wants to go here. So I'm going to hold down V to vertex snap it to that point. There we go. Now, if you remember, we could use duplicate special again to make the whole row of these because I want one of these below every down rope. So we need the same settings in duplicate special as before. So edit duplicate special, bring up the settings. In fact, I wanted one less than 29. So let's make that 28 and hit apply. There we go. That should have given me enough steps. There we go to the last rope. Brilliant. Now the other thing you want to do with end cloth is I don't want each one of these to be a separate end cloth object. That would just be far too heavy. Ooh, let me scale them out to the right width first. There we go. That would be too heavy. So what I can do is go into the polygon menu set, go into mesh and say combine, so they become one object. Now, since these polys are separate from each other, Nucleus will still treat them as separate objects, even though they are one object. The good thing is they'll only have one Nucleus node sorting them out, whereas if I had a Nucleus node for each one of those steps, it could get very, very slow to sim. Cool. We've built our geometry and we're ready to go. So let me save. I'm going to select everything and go Edit, Delete All by Type. Not Delete by Type, but Delete All by Type history, and that will delete all the history in the entire scene, regardless of what's selected. And I don't mind that in this case. That's quite a dangerous thing to do normally. Okay, let's do Control S to save. And there we go. So let's now start to build the system. Just going to temporarily hide these steps. Let me bring up the outliner here. Select this step geometry and hide it. And I'm just going to select all the curves and change the dynamics menu set, N dynamics. This is where we have all the N dynamics. We've got N particles, N mesh for N cloth, basically, and N hair. So we can make particles, meshes, and hair dynamic curves all interact with each other. Now, I'm not going to go through the settings as I mentioned before. These are pretty much identical to Maya's old hair system. The only difference being is you've got decent collisions and decent constraints, which is where the hair system failed. And the advantage is it reacts properly with the Nucleus system. What a big, big bonus that is. So let's look at how we can now turn this into hair. So here's the N hair menu. Now, if I was to choose create hair, that's just going to create hair on an object. I don't want to do that. In this special case, I actually want to make the curves I've already made dynamic, and there is a setting for that down here, make selected curves dynamic. So let me click on that and they become dynamic. Now here's the fun thing, if you press play you can see stuff starts to happen. Let me change my out time here to something like 1000, so there's plenty of time for it to play and run through. Let's see what happens now. Whee! Okay, that's a bit strange. What's going on? Well, let me bring up the outliner again and let's have a look. Now, when you make a hair system, you end up with your hair node. Because it's now embedded in Nucleus, you also end up with the Nucleus solver node. Now, the hair system node here has all the settings for the hair and how its physical parameters. The Nucleus node has a few other parameters for the actual system as a whole. Now, more interestingly, the curves you can see moving here are the output curves. And the curves were originally modeled now are what we see static here. They're called the input curves, and they're actually hidden under what's called a follicle. And the follicle is what beds their curve into the scene, either onto a piece of geometry and makes it move with it, or just hangs it in space. And as you can see, all our curves are hanging in space. The ends of these curves are fixed in space, and so the ends of these curves fixed in space, which gives the illusion that they're not moving at all, but they are just fixed at the top and bottom. Now, the things that fix these hairs in space, as I mentioned briefly, is the follicles. Now, if we open that up, we can see we get one follicle per curve. I'm going to hold Shift and select them all, because it's the follicles that tell the curves how to be pinned in space. And if you look in the channel editor, because this will allow us to edit all of them at the same time, we can see we have this setting called point lock, and it's set to both ends here. This is where the actual hair curve's attached at the moment. It is attached at both ends. We do not want this. I want it to not be attached at all. So let me choose no attach. If I rewind and press play, we'll see the output curves just fall away in space. And look, you can even see the uprights were doing the right thing. And our follicle curves are staying where they are. Brilliant, we've got the rope bridge falling, but it's not dynamic yet. What we need to do is set up a set of constraints in order to pin it in space. Now I'm going to put a constraint on the ends of these big curves to pin these into space. So let me just, first of all, go to display NURBS CVs and turn those off. Okay, let me try that again. Display NURBS CVs. Won't turn them off. That's a good thing. Let's leave them on for now then. So we have these constraints here, and these work with all N objects, particles, cloth, or meshes, and you can mix and match, which makes this system very, very powerful indeed. Now, what we can do is two constraints I'm going to use first. Well, the first constraint I'm going to use is the transform constraint. What this does, it fixes a point or points of your N object onto a locator in space. Now I want to do that for the ends of my rope bridge so that I have control over them. So I'm going to choose the CVs I want locked, and I'm going to right click, choose CV, and select these two NCVs. And I'm going to go constrain, in fact let me select all four at the same time. So CV, hold down shift and select those two, right click CV, hold down shift, select those two, right click CV, hold down shift and select those two. So I have this bunch of four selected. Then I can go end constraint, transform, and it gives me a locator here which can be animated, and that will pull my bridge along. Don't want that in this particular case, but it will hold those ends in place like so. Brilliant. So I want to do the same again at the other end here. So let me zoom in to the end. And again, what I can actually do is select all four curves, and up here change the into component mode. And now I can quite easily just hold shift and select all four. And then if you hit G, it'll redo the last tool, or you can go constraint transform to make that again. So now I have two constraints, one at each end. So I press play, we see the bridge swings and hangs like that. Now that's not very good. We need to attach all these side bits as well. Let me save again. I'm going to go to side view. Now to attach all these upright ropes is dead easy. You just need to select them all. Let's come out of component mode. There we go. And I'm going to shift, in fact I'm going to select all my curves with shift. There we go. So I have all the curves selected and just the curves. Now here's a funky constraint. I'm going to constrain basically each vertex, the top vertex of this curve, to the vertex it's touching in the long curves. And to do that, we can go into constraints and use this constraint here, component to component. And this will basically connect every vertex in one object to every other vertex in the other. So let's use that. Might take a second to draw, and there we go. We can see these flashy green squares, and we can see those sort of ants between them. What the ants between them is show you which CVs are connected to each other's, and as you can see they're all connected to each other. That's not what we want. If I press play, that'll probably end up pretty ugly. Not too ugly, but it's not quite what I want. Mind you, it looks like what I want, but it's not the best way of doing it at all. I'm going to adjust this constraint to do it the best way, and I only really want to constrain this point here to the point nearest it on the curve, not to every other point around. Now, if you go into the outliner, at the very bottom we have the last dynamic constraint we made, and that's these component constraints. Look, if I select the other two, they highlight to where they are. This is the one that we've just made. Now on the settings of that at the top here, we'll see we have connection method, and it's just connecting the nearest pair of points to each other. It's very inefficient. There's a lot of points we don't want to be attached. Now if I can change this to within max distance, dink, this is the threshold. If I make the distance big, we can see they all join up, and we can get very strange things occurring here. But if I make the distance small enough, like 0.1, I can see that it's only attached at this point, and at this point, and down here, and that's exactly what I'd like. Now if I press play, we rewind, you can see the whole bridge is being held together. Now there's a slight problem with it. It's very, very stretchy. Rope itself is not stretchy. Let me go into the outliner and change the physical properties of my hair. And we do that through the hair system node here. This is where we have all the physical properties. And here's the node. We have one here called dynamic properties. Let me open that up. And we'll see we've got settings like stretch resistance. Rope doesn't stretch, but it does compress. So I'm going to put the stretch resistance up to something like 200, which will make it very, very tense. So let me rewind and press play and see how that looks. Much better, much more tense, but it still is a bit bouncy. The other thing we can do is, if we remember the CVs on these, there aren't many, so it's fairly low res still, which is why it stretches a lot. Now in the hair system, what we can do is add a few extra bend links. If I put 2 extra bend links, I've got more links in between those CVs, and that'll effectively stiffen or make the rope a bit more rigid. If I press play again, you'll see it doesn't stretch as much. It's a good way of stopping the stretching, and that feels much more natural to a rope bridge. It feels more like rope now, the way that would stretch. So I'm quite happy with that. So let's rewind and just save. Brilliant. So what I'm going to do now is go into my outliner and unhide my planks of wood that are going to be the steps. Now, in order that this becomes part of the end system, I need to turn these steps into an end cloth object. So to do that, I'm going to go to end mesh and do create end cloth, which is now made of an end cloth object. It's very simple. If I rewind and press play, we'll see they just fall away. Some of them are colliding with the ropes. Some of them are just falling away. In fact, let me go into side view and just make sure there's a tiny, tiny gap between these and the rope, just so that they don't stick on the initial frame. There we go. Because they do actually pick up on the collisions. We don't want anything like that. There we go. That falls away much more nicely. Brilliant. Now, with my end cloth object here, let me just change some of these settings. Again, I'm not going to explain them in much depth, just to set it up for this tutorial. Now, in collisions, we don't need these to self-collide. So just for speed, I'm going to turn that off. And where else do we need to go? That's right, in dynamic properties, I don't want these wooden planks to flex like they're cloth. So I need to change some settings here to make them behave like a rigid body object. They're already behaving pretty rigidly because they don't have any subdivisions across them. So here we go. In order to do that, I want them to not stretch, so I'm going to put 200 here. I don't want them to compress either, so let me put 100 here. And 10 in the bend resistance. And I'm going to put 10 in the rigidity here and 10 in the deform resistance, which will stop them deforming and make them rigid. Now the last little trick is to turn on use poly shells, which means they're going to pretty much be solved as solid objects. Cool. I shouldn't get any flexing on those now. The only thing I need to do now is actually physically attach these to the ropes. And that's easily enough done. Again, let me go into side view. Oh yeah, I hit Control Spacebar then to give myself more real estate. That just toggles that on and off. So what I need to do is select, I want basically to constrain this up. If I select one of these curves, I want basically the end CV here to attach itself to this step. So let me just go into this view, select these two bottom curves. 1, 2, do Control H. No, I don't want to do that. 1 sec, because I want to keep the upright ones. Cool. Oh, that's it. Let me hide these two as well. There we go. So I should just be able to select these guys, hit F8, and there we go. We can see all their CVs. Let me give myself the real estate again. I'm very careful. I can just select the bottom CV like that. Is that just the bottom one? Yes, it is. Brilliant. So I've selected all the bottom CVs. If I right-click on a step and choose Object Mode and hold Shift, I can select that object too. So I've got the CVs and the object selected. And I can go Constraints, Point to Surface, and that will just constrain this point to the nearest surface that it's at. And there we go. Look, they look like they're all constrained. If I go Display, Show, Last Hidden, get my curves back. There we go. Let's save. So if I rewind and press play, let's see what happens. Yay! One rope bridge. Now if I bring up the outliner, these static curves are what we're under the follicle group here. So if I just hide that, it should all look proper. Proper Indiana Jones. There we go. Yay! Excellent. Now we can make a let's have a little fun here. If I go create polygon cube, just lift this up, orientate it a bit, make it a bit bigger. What I'm going to do is make this into a large object to drop onto my rope bridge. So I could make this into an end cloth again. And again, if I select it, I'm going to the end cloth shape. Let's make it rigid. So 200, 100, 10, and then the rigidity 10, the deform resistance 10, and turn on use polygon shells. This will make this now fall, and because it's all end cloth, it will react with my rope bridge. Boof. You see they react to each other. Now let's make this cube a little heavier. So if I scroll down in the end cloth shape, here's some mass. Let's make that 10. Rewind and press play. There we go. We have a lovely collision. Now to try and make this things a bit more stable and much quicker, a good thing to do is to go to the nucleus node, which is the actual solver, and increase the collision iterations here. I found numbers about 24 tend to be quite good, and substep 6 to give me very accurate looking collisions. So let's have a look at that now. Might go a little bit slower, but we get much better collisions and not so much stretching. There we go. Looks much nicer. Let's create another object, endcloth object, to drop onto our rope bridge. Let's make a nice big sphere again. Create endcloth. So the same settings as before. Use poly shells. 10 deform, 10 rigidity, 10 bend, 100 compression, and 200 stretch. See that now drop onto our bridge. And it should react, and you see that it squashes the bridge, but the bridge also bounces the balls up. Cool. Now let me show you one other feature of this. Another really nice feature about endcloth and end hair is the fact that these constraints can break. We can put what we call glue on them. So what I'm going to do is first of all select this constraint pinning the wooden bits on. And let me show you, if I scroll down on the constraint here, we've got this thing called glue strength. If I put this to 0, there's no glue. This constraint doesn't work, and you'll see that the bits just fall apart. And at 1, it totally holds it together. Now if I put a value, say 0.2 in there, that should hold it together. So you can see until something heavy goes on there, and that should make it reach over that threshold and hopefully break it. There, our balls aren't heavy enough. Let me make this ball a lot heavier, so it should have enough force to break that. Let's make this 50 in weight. Ooh, that's a lot. So let's have a look and see if that just breaks through our bridge. There you go. You can see it snaps straight through the constraints, and it all gives up. Brilliant. Let's make that bigger and properly break our bridge. Indiana Jones style. Mind you, he used a big machete. I'm using a big ball. There we go. Look, it's tearing all the ropes. We can see our wooden bits are giving up. Now, the other thing is this constraint here isn't giving up. So let's give this a bit of a weight, as a bit of a glue as well. So hopefully the ropes will snap now, as well as the wooden bits. No, it wasn't strong enough for the rope to snap. Let's reduce the glue, say 0.1. And of course, you can put all these settings in. And I could have made more than one constraint. I could have just constrained these and these ones differently and these ones differently, and really affected the way it all tears up. Oh, look at that. There we go. Absolutely destroying my rope bridge. And the other thing is, say at frame 72, I can select this constraint, and you'll notice the constraints globally have an enable button. So if I just keyframe this here and go to one more frame and turn that off, that's going to give up at frame 73. Now, just to make it like Indiana Jones, I'm just going to make a cube for my cliff. And let's just pop that there. So we've got a cliff on one side. And just for sake of completeness, let's have a cliff on the other side. Let's just make them fairly large, like that. Nice and wide. There we go. Suppose we could just scale them out that way. Whee! Let's get right into our rope bridge. Now what I'm going to do is just combine these, mesh combine. And in Nucleus, if you make these a passive object, they'll react with the endcloth objects, but they won't really sim themselves. We put wireframe on shade, it's easier to see. There we go. So let's now play blast out Indiana Jones. So let me just right click play blast. That'll take a second or two. Okay, we're back. The flipbook has run through. Let me just start playing through. See the balls and thing collide, making all the glue give up between the constraints there. And you can see at this frame, when I've hand animated the constraint at the end here, that just gives up and lets the rope bridge swing across the ravine, just like Indy did. There you go. Now you'll notice it's a bit floaty. That's because you should build things to see scale. Basically, if you make a 1 unit ball in Maya, that's effectively 1 meter wide. So our scene here is actually huge. Now in the Nucleus node, we can affect that scaling by coming down here to scale attributes. Now by default, the space scale is set to 1, where 1 Maya unit is 1 meter. And as you can see, things go pretty slow because they're huge. Now if I want to shrink my scene down, I can reduce this number. If I do 0.3, effectively I've scaled this all down by a third, or in other words, I've amplified all my forces by 3 times. So maybe I should take the weight down a little bit on this ball here. So let's go for maybe 3 and take the weight down to this, to about 3. Let's see the effect of that. Again, I'll just pause the video while I flipbook this one up. We can see that this space scale will make everything seem 3 times smaller. In other words, things will go a lot more faster and more natural. So hello, I'm back again. The flipbook has gone through. Now I've just made a few other adjustments. For example, these highlighted constraint here, I've just keyframed it a little bit earlier so it looks nicer. And I've played with the weights of the ball, so the ball here breaks the glue, but this one doesn't. I could play with the glue settings a bit more, or maybe even, instead of using one constraint for all the bits here, actually break it into sections, have 2, 3 or 4 constraints with different glues on, just to vary or break up the way it breaks up. So let me press play and see the effect of that. And you can see everything moves a lot faster now. We've affected the scene scale. So you either build things to scale from start, or realize how much bigger your scene is than the Maya scale, and use that space scale to scale the sim back down so it will move realistically. And there we go. That's how to make an Indiana Jones style rope bridge collapse dynamically in Maya 13 with N hair. Well, I've hoped you enjoyed this tutorial and found it interesting and fun. Please don't forget to have a look through our website at all the other tutorials we have on there. We have a lot of free tutorials and webinars with all sorts of things covering from basic Maya interaction right up to dynamics and rigid bodies and other bits and pieces. And there is another tutorial which goes into depth on using nCloth as rigid body system. So please, please, please check out all the other stuff on our website. There's an awful lot of great resources there. Plus as well, one thing we do like to do is seeing our students take further these free tutorials. So if you've done something cool with the rope bridge or had a different idea with N-hair, please post it on the gallery. It gives us a great opportunity to look at it, and we give you feedback too. Plus all the other students get to see it and they give you feedback as well, which is a very, very constructive process in itself. Plus you never know if it's really good, we'll blog about it and everybody knows what a cool piece of work that you've done. So please, please do something and submit it to us. You know, we're always interested to see and offer advice to our students, especially with these tutorials. So again, I hope you've enjoyed this free tutorial from me, Mark Spevick, on behalf of Escape Studios, and we look forward to seeing you back here again soon. Thank you and goodbye.